And here we are live in the spoiler room once again, everyone. Thank you for venturing down the stairs, pulling up a chair, and grabbing your favorite cup of sarsaparilla. As look at that sharp ass mug, kicking the seat sharp mug there. Look
This
at
is a
that.
gift from my father-in-law. One of a kind.
That is spiffy right there. That's sharp looking. And tonight, yes, we are continuing our Skin Flicks month, where we are looking at films, not those skin flicks. That's a different show that we may do at one point. But no, this is Skin Flicks, movies with skin in the title. And this was such a fun list to put together because I've got such a wide variety of films with skin in the title. And today is prime example of that. We are looking at a 1971 Western called Skin Game, directed by Paul Bogart and Gordon Douglas, and starring a number of familiar faces in this film. Ian, please give us the synopsis of Skin Game. You do this so well.
Imagine Mel Brooks's Blazing Saddles, but okay, it's Mel Brooks's Blazing Saddles if it was a straight comedy instead of a farce, mixed kind of with 12 Years a Slave and Django Unchained. And you have a movie that Mark, why does it take you trying to program a month of movies with skin in the title to tell me about this movie? How have I never heard of this thing before? It's one of my new all-time favorite movies. This is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I can't stress how much joy I had watching this movie and like wondering again, why does this have this needs it's got a Warner Archives DVD release, which I'm going to be purchasing.
Nice.
There's no Blu-ray. There's no nobody talks about this movie. It's got James Garner and Louis Gossett Jr. doing essentially like Han and Chewie 6 years before Star Wars, but in the Old West. And Candy Clark 13 years before she was Ma'am on Webster. Come on. Ed Asner. America's Treasure, Ed Asner, throwing around the N-word like he's in a Tarantino movie. My God.
Oh, it's got all kinds of I just picked this one again because I was looking for a variety of different films that had skin in the title, and I ran across this, and when I saw who was in it, I'm like, huh. And then I too watched this and go, wow, where has this film been? This is like 10, what would be 15 years before we got a film that was in the spirit of this in the form of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, in a way. As far as its spirit goes, that was different, but still, the con artists meeted up with another con artist.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't tell you what this film was about at all. I just kind of went on this jag of praising it. No. But it's 1857. We meet up with Quincy, played by James Garner, and Jason, played by Louis Gossett Jr., in a town called Dirty Shame, Missouri. And that's the thing, all the towns that they run into have these terrible, weird names, like Lost Cause or whatever. But no, so Quincy rides into town with Jason kind of trailing behind him, goes into a fine establishment and offers basically an impromptu slave auction. Says, I gotta unload this guy and try and bring in a pretty penny. Sells him, and later Jason escapes, and we catch up with Quincy and Jason later that night off in the wilderness outside of town by a campfire, laughing at the rubes that they've just conned out of all this money. And apparently they go from town to town throughout the Old West and across states. They try and hit towns that they've never been to before because they're pulling this con, but they just go and they keep reselling Jason over and over and over again for hundreds of dollars and stashing the money in, they got a big bank account in Chicago. They're carrying around wads of cash on them. But they've been partners for a long time and they're good friends. Well, they're friends in the way that as best for friends as con men can be, because they never quite trust each other, and they're constantly bickering back and forth about the take and the con. Yeah, it's a wonderful partnership. And I brought up 12 Years a Slave because I don't know if did you ever see that movie, Mark?
I unfortunately have not. No.
Okay. Chiwetel Ejiofor is great in that film, as he is in pretty much everything he's in. But the story of that was based on a true story. Is about a man who was a free man, northerner, who was black, who through a series of unfortunate events winds up becoming a slave, and is lost for years and like decades of his life, and sold into slavery and horribly tortured and humiliated, as was the way. But this kind of relates to Skin Game in that their cons kind of catch up to them at one point, thanks to Mr. Ed Asner, who plays Plunkett. Yeah,
Plunkett.
Yes. Who's basically he's like a bounty hunter. He goes and wrangles slaves and brings them back to the escaped slaves and brings them back to their masters, so called, for money. Jason runs afoul of him, and he gets caught up and sold to this plantation owner in Texas, and ends up having to be a slave for a number of years, and in that discovers a lot about himself and his people and the castes of blacks in America at that time. You've got the free people in the North, you've got the field workers, the house folks, and then you've got the newly imported Africans, like don't speak the language. Yeah. And even it's just crazy because a lot of the movies we get, there's like this kind of a solidarity among African Americans and blacks, especially around this time period. But there is this in Skin Game. I don't know how historically accurate it is, but it feels honest. They're the people who like Jason, who were born in America in a different part of the country than he still suffers prejudice, of course. But even when he meets these African tribesmen who are being held in a stable in this plantation, he freaks out because he runs out screaming, "Cannibals! They're all cannibals!
Yeah.
They're gonna eat us! They're all savages!" I'm like, wow. So it's a for 1971. I think it is a richly layered and textured movie about racial politics that, I mean, we don't even talk this way today. I think to our detriment.
Well, and not just amongst African Americans in that, but also even amongst the Caucasians in here. There's a tier of sorts, a pecking order. There's kind of a level as well, not nearly as much as what we see, but James Gardner's character, it's funny. You mentioned it's correct. They have a very solid business partner relationship. And it's one of those where they're being the con men. They don't let themselves get too attached, but deep down inside, these are both really good guys, and they do care about each other. I mean, at one point, Gardner's character goes to get his buddy. Even though he's a con man, and it's even called into question by Ginger. She's like, "Why are you?" It's like,
well, and we should talk about Ginger, played by the aforementioned Susan Clark. Quincy and Jason meet this woman in a town, and she's indignant that Quincy is there to sell this black man. It's interesting because when they come into the town, there's these two kind of rallying factions. One, I think it's to make Kansas a free state. So you've got all these kind of political activists saying, we've got to, give people their dignity. And then you've got other folks who are, saying, no, we got to keep things separate. Down to when they first come in, Quincy introduces himself and says, "Hey, I'm from Missouri." And someone hands him a $5 gold piece. He said, "Well, hey, I'm just going to tell everyone from Missouri." And he goes up to another person and says, "I am in town from Missouri." And he gets, I think, punched in the face or something like that, right? Because the idea is there are people from the anti-Free State faction who are importing people from Missouri to come in and vote in their favor,
right?
To essentially rig the election. But yeah, and Ginger is, this church-going, God-fearing woman who's indignant at the indignity of slavery, but it turns out she's also a con woman who, in the course of about 10 seconds, steals Quincy's watch and his gold piece, and I think something else.
His money,
so she,
yeah,
his money. So she kind of gets embroiled. It sort of becomes this bizarre, like, for a second it's a threesome of con people, but then Jason gets separated, and then Ginger and Quincy team up, and they kind of have a budding relationship going that's part professional, part romantic, and they go to save him. And it's like this year, it feels like they're separated for a couple of years.
It's at least
it's
at least 2 months, if not more, because what ends up happening in the whole thing,
I thought it was 2 years. Maybe I misheard it, but
well, because what ends up happening in this whole thing is, like you said, the cons catch up to him. Plunkett ends up recognizing them, and Gardner's character, I keep forgetting the names. Quincy, he gets put in jail, and they end up taking Jason to the slaver. And he's got a beard, but it's only like 2 months. It mentioned 2 months because his beard is like full on.
Oh, it is 2 months. Yeah, I wrote that. Yeah. I have that in my notes. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, from when they break out. So because it takes him a while to get Jason and this slave girl who Jason becomes very romantically attached to, Naomi.
Yeah.
They end up traveling with Plunkett to this one slaver, this plantation. And meanwhile, Quincy's been in jail, and he helps get broken out by Ginger in this wonderful scene. The way these three play off each other throughout this entire film is just wonderful. The way these three individuals play off each other, especially when you get Gardner and Clark together, the way they play off each other as well. It's just, I love her character. I love the Ginger character quite a bit. She is impressive. And what's interesting about it is, even though Quincy's out across the country looking for Jason, they're still in the con. So he and Ginger, while they're looking for Jason, are also conning people by posing as doctors or priests, talking about leprosy.
Yeah, essentially trying to get everybody they come across who's a slave owner to convince them that, yeah, there's a disease or leprosy going around, so they need to check their slaves. They're trying to, track down Jason, and as you mentioned, the process make some coin on, oh, well, we've got the tonic, or, well, we can't give you this until you cut us a check to build, for $500 to build a wing for treatment center or whatever back in wherever they're from. Yeah. They're always working it. And yeah, it's so fun. It's, wacky disguises and all this stuff. But what really struck me is, Louis Gossett Jr. I don't think I ever knew the guy having hair.
Yeah, you're right. It's like, huh.
So to see him as like a young, 30-year-old guy, and usually I think, like, after an officer and a gentleman, kind of, not to say he was typecast, but typically he was known for more serious or stern kind of roles, right? Like Iron Eagle, one of our favorite films, Chappie for Life. But to see him in a comedy is just so much fun. His chemistry with James Garner is, again, I understand why this movie isn't talked about, because it's 1971, and if you had, Tarantino is pretty much the last person that can get away with throwing around that many N-bombs and derogatory, stereotypes about blacks, Indians, everybody, that you can't show this at a music box retrospective. Although it should be shown, because there's racism in this movie, but it is not a racist movie. It is what you might unfortunately term, I guess, an anti-racist movie.
Yeah.
It's what you want to see as far as messaging without being preachy.
it goes along with what you were saying, that it definitely has a spirit of Blazing Saddles in a way. For those who call Blazing Saddles a racist film as well, obviously haven't really watched or paid attention, because it's not making fun of race. In fact, the best character in Blazing Saddles is a good-looking black guy who's smarter than pretty much everybody in the movie. You know, and in here, our con artists, yes, he's doing the con of selling his buddy, but as the movie goes along, we learn that these two have been traveling doing different con games for quite some time, and this is the only one that they found profitable. But even when Quincy's talking about it, you can tell he doesn't exactly enjoy it. The con, but it makes them money. So he doesn't see the angle. Whereas Jason's like, dude, I'm a free guy. I'm educated. New Jersey, this is not. And he's like, yeah, I get it. And they're sticking it to the racists the whole time. Just even Ginger and Quincy, when they're going to look for Jason, they're sticking it to the slave owners by putting this fear into them and getting what would be a lot of money from $500 in 1853 or something like
right,
that.
and they had $10,000 in the bank in Chicago. I mean, that's unheard of, right?
And they had 6,500 in their little envelope before Ginger took it from under their saddle. They had 6,500.
That slave auction thing was pretty great. Where where those two older guys were trying to outbid each other for Jason, and just like driving up the price, and the one guy's like, I didn't. He basically, the one guy ended up buying him for like $3,500 or something ridiculous like that, and the first guy says, "Ha, the joke's on you. I came here without any money." He turns out his pockets. But yeah, but it's also a great moment of tension, because you see Quincy was supposed to buy Jason or buy Naomi for $1,000, and they had some money left over to buy Jason per their usual con, but there was a cap to it. And those two other guys kept like going up and up and up, and there was a real danger that if they went over the 6,500 or whatever, 5,500, I guess, that he had left, there could have been some real trouble that we do see later in the movie. But yeah, this had the perfect balance of like comedy, sincere drama, and tension. It's, again, this movie needs to be seen by more people, but it's not gonna be.
No, and there's genuine feelings between Quincy and Jason. It's like Quincy, Jason's really like, dude, I can't do this anymore. And Quincy being the con man, but still he's like, all right, okay, one final job. Of course it was not one final job, and Jason kind of knew Quincy was it, but he was sincere at that moment. But yeah, the relationship between everybody is just I loved watching all these scenes together with these people. And then, like you said, Louis Gossett Jr. bringing some serious moments when he was talking serious to Quincy. It's like there was this hilarious moment where, Quincy just got robbed by Ginger, and he needed money, so he actually takes Jason outside and goes, "I need to borrow $3." And Jason's like, are you kidding me? I love that moment. It's like,
well, it's something that kind of, it's a thread throughout the movie that kind of comes to a head at the end, where Quincy is, and yes, this is a spoiler room, folks. Quincy is strung up on a whipping post and given several lashes. What's great, I think, about these two characters is they are con men who meet, in jail for having done essentially similar cons. You want to talk about a lack of political correctness? I think they both show up. They're fortune tellers who have these like makeshift like Swami turbans on, but there's always this, not exactly a tension, but an understanding that they're partners, but one is at a distinct advantage over the other. because there's always a danger that Jason could be sold or stolen or the wrong mistake, and Quincy could walk right out of there, and Jason would have other consequences because of his skin color. And Quincy, over the course of the film, he gradually comes to understand this tension in a way that they hadn't before, because they're used to just skipping into town, doing their little game. It's a game to them. It's a skin game, and then leaving. Well, when they get caught, they realize just how bad those consequences are. And to the point where it's like, yeah, he ends up on a whipping post and treated like a subhuman animal. And it's just lucky that that the so-called cannibals were just waiting in the barn with swords and whips and whatever.
Jason had planned that, because there was this moment where we were talking about earlier, the town where they had the bidding war between the two older gentlemen, and just when they're going to get this money, suddenly those for the free state of Kansas, this crazy, I guess, this crazy wilderness guy with a bit of a following comes into town, frees all the slaves, and they're just like, wait, no, we want the money. What are you doing? And he rides off with Jason, and Jason bails. And so Quincy goes after him, and Jason comes up behind him posing as an Indian. Again, not exactly politically correct, folks. But he makes some words up, and Quincy's like, actually, that sounded pretty authentic. Well, it comes into play later when he's in the barn and he finds the Afrikaans there. He starts rattling off words, and suddenly one of the things he says they understand. So he starts trying out more words, and soon they're listening to him, basically. And he trains them to be able to grab weapons, because he was planning an escape before Ginger and Quincy just happened upon the plantation where he was at.
And it's a cool story idea, but if we're going to throw around the P word problematic, it is a bit. I don't quite know how I feel about that, because I'll forgive the whole like Indian get up and all that and making up the language, because they are portraying 1857 Missouri.
Yeah.
They didn't have internet, and they didn't necessarily have, friendly natives that they could go and say, hang out and say, oh, tell me more about your culture, enlighten me. They probably just knew them from what they saw, what they read in like, news news pamphlets and pulp, stories. So when Jason comes up behind Quincy and starts like kind of making up this, what we'd call very stereotypical, Indian talk, yeah, it's kind of a gag. But to find that works on native Africans, like a mumbo jumbo language that's not even from that same culture, and it just kind of works, I'm like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Because when James Gardner shows up and he's like, how do you know their language? I was like, that's what I was wondering. I think it had more to do with the forcefulness and the tone of some of the words and the emphasis he was putting on it that sounded more like commands. And maybe it was just happened to be, because it's not just like one word. He, as you put it,
knows a number,
trains them. Right. So I'm supposed to believe that by making stuff up, he happens to pick up on keywords that mean attack or bow or I'm your chief in this African language that is on a completely different continent than the one they're on.
Yeah, that part was a little bit like, okay, but I think, like you're saying, I took it more as the way he says those lines is how they interpret it. I mean, these unfortunate folks are in a strange land where no one understands a word they say, and they don't understand anything that's really happening. And so you have a gentleman who sounds authoritative. So, I think, they went along with it, if nothing else, just from the way he presented the language, more so than what he was actually saying. But it was still a bit problem. Like, okay, okay, all right, but he uses it to give the command for them to come out and totally obliterate the plantation folk.
Well, which gets to the Django Unchained, this
Right.
kind of great revenge fantasy, which again for 1971, I mean, Blazing Saddles was a few years
Right.
before this, but it's just still it had that kind of righteous justice
Mhm.
kind of like in entertainment thing again without beating you over the head with it. Um, the one other thing I'll say, and it's a nitpick with my 2023 glasses on, because I love to put
Sure,
those on,
sure.
but I was genuinely shocked when Jason meets Naomi in the barn. Jason is sent out to the stable where, Quincy gets to spend $3, as you mentioned, in a nice hotel for the night. But because Jason is who he is, he has to sleep out in the barn. He goes, he chains himself up, and he's kind of talking to himself because he's got the public face of the, oh, Lord, master, kind of, stereotypical slave speak. But he is a, kind of a well-educated, New Jerseyan. So when he's in private, he's talking, you know, he's just communicating without the nonsense.
Mhm.
Naomi is up in the loft in the barn. She's been chained up. She's a newly, she has just been put into bondage by her
Right.
owner. She catches, Jason, kind of figures him out. He goes up into that loft and they're talking to each
Yeah.
other and stuff. And he starts like caressing her and stuff, and she's just like
Yeah.
totally into it. And then it's like the fade to black. I don't think anything happened in that moment
Yeah.
except maybe they cuddled up. But I'm like, that is a byproduct of the 1970s.
That
Like,
that was a creepy a bit of a creepy moment. Yeah, I fully admit I'm like, "Oh, you're gonna go. Oh, you're going. Okay,
see, I didn't find it
you're
creepy. I just found it kind of presumptive
it
that,
will prism. Yeah,
it's because
yeah.
he was being very affectionate. I mean, it was clear to me that they liked each other,
Right.
but it was okay. They met 2 minutes ago.
Mhm.
A little bit more related. And honestly, there was something else that there was a thread that I thought they were going to explore more that they didn't, because at that auction right before the kind of revolutionaries show up, um, and Royal Dano plays was it Big John or
Mhm.
John Brown?
John
He
Brown.
says to the New Jerusalem before he like leads everybody out of town. But no, right before that, when Naomi is purchased by Quincy, he hands over the money and the deed, I guess, or whatever the hell it is. The guy who sold her was the young boy, because she grew up in this family with a little boy who was her age. They grew up together, so she's
Mhm.
19, I guess he's 19, and he's the one who ended up selling her off. You could tell that he was very affectionate towards her. I thought they were going to try and do something where he didn't want her to leave or didn't
Mhm.
want her to be a slave or something like that, and explore that storyline. But no, that gets brushed aside with the revolution.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they play at it. It was an interesting and modern filmmakers, your 2.5 hour films or whatever, they give you enough backstory with Naomi in a little couple minute montage in here to get you to completely understand where they're going with her relationship with the young man who had to sell her, because she mentions how he had an arranged marriage and his new wife wanted Naomi out of the picture, and that's why
Yeah.
he was putting her up for auction reluctantly. And yeah, when we get to meet this guy, you could tell there's something there, but he's held to his status and his situation, and he's just like, she likes this food and she's like that, and I thought for a minute they were going to play the angle of, oh, maybe he, you know deeds it back to the guy or something, or whatnot. But they don't. But I'm glad they didn't, because I'm like, well, how would James feel about that? Because Quincy uses $1,000 of James' cut
Jason.
to Jason, excuse me, Jason's cut to get Naomi so she doesn't go to a different slaver. And he's successful with that before the revolutionaries show up.
Yeah, I mean, it's just I'm fine with it being a dangling thread. Except for the fact that, when Naomi enters the picture, you kind of feel like it's going to be a thing with Jason and Naomi, and it kind of is. But the second half of the movie becomes much more about Ginger and Quincy's relationship.
Right.
We do catch
Yeah.
up with Jason and Naomi. They are together and everything, but she slides more into the background. She becomes more of a, we're going to cut to her to get a reaction to what else is going on. And
Right.
she has less, I guess I'll say, agency as a character than Ginger does. And that's a shame because I don't know who the actress was who played Naomi.
Oh,
Brenda
she
Sykes.
yeah,
Okay.
Brenda Sykes, she was in a number of blaxploitation films at the time. Not a huge amount of work, but she was in, I think, Foxy Brown, was it? Not Foxy, I forgot which. I was looking her work up because, yeah, she was in a couple of those films with Pam Grier and such. So she did work there, but not a huge amount of work. But I liked her character. I wanted to see more of her character too, quite a bit.
And I'm looking at IMDb right now, and the profile picture of her is of her and Louis Gossett Jr. in completely different outfits. So it looks like
Right.
they starred in another movie together, which I gotta find out what that is. Because yeah, I I like I liked her character, and I liked there was that something about her. She had that je ne sais quoi. I'm like, I want to see more of her. I like Candy Clark. She was good in this, but it would have been nice to. Yeah, again, modern filmmaking, it would have been a 2.5 hour movie. I could have done with another half hour to give her more
To
story to find out what's going on with her. Yeah.
spend some more time with her and Jason, seeing how they're handling things. One of the interesting things I thought was an interesting scene was when Jason's first there, he gets bought by this guy Calloway, and when he's first there, he steps out of line and he gets whipped brutally. Um, and so they're taking care of him. The other slaves are helping take care of him, and Naomi's there. And there's this interesting thing to where he's like, I don't know how to be what are the rules? He asked because he had no clue, and they taught him about how not, what you need to do. You got to put this aside. You got to put, your free your free man mentality aside, and it's you got to be polite. Don't look at anybody in the eye. If you're questioning it, look at the head of the house servants. And I just thought it was an interesting thing to where you have have him, and he's just like he he's not picking up on what he has to do to not get whipped, and so he asks them, and they're like, yeah, no, you just got to do this and this, and he's just like, you can tell it really burns him to have to do that, but he doesn't want to get whipped again either. So
Well, it's a couple of things. One, it kind of shows where Jason is at, having come from, New Jersey, and
right.
again, we only really see what his life was like after he's hooked up with Quincy, but you get the feeling that he hasn't spent a lot of time around, slaves or
Right.
other people. He's kind of in and out of town. To him, slaves are mostly the way, or other lower caste,
Mhm.
Southern blacks are the way that we kind of see them in this movie for in a lot of ways, just background characters,
Yeah.
right? So when he's having to interact with them and figure out what the whole deal is, it's like, well, yeah, he wouldn't necessarily know anything about this life, and that's it's a privilege, but it's also kind of
Mhm.
sad. And you see his eyes kind of opening to things, and he doesn't want to leave people behind, and he convinced Quincy that it's not right
Right.
that it's worth them jeopardizing their freedom and possibly losing their money to do what's right. But that scene where he's on, introduced to Calloway's plantation or whatever it is, they say, if you have any problems, or if you have any complaints,
Mhm.
just tell Mr. Bass. He'll consider it, and if it's worth bringing to my attention, I'll find out about it. So it sounds kind of nice, and that lulls Jason into thinking, oh well, I got a couple of things to say. Excuse me, Mr. Calloway. I don't actually belong here. I'm from New Jersey, and
Yeah.
I'm well educated, and there's been a horrible mistake, and yada yada yada. And Calloway says, well, I've never, not in all my years. And then Jason keeps going on and on and on. And he's like, I've never heard anybody, any of you, people,
Mhm.
whatever, speak like this. And he says, if I ever hear it again, I'm going to blow your black ass off.
Yeah.
And that, just the look on Jason's face when just like all he realizes he's dealing with a combination of a monster and a moron, and he has no hope left. He's just stuck here and he's got to figure something else out. I mean, yeah, again, Louis Gossett Jr., man.
Oh, he sells it. Well, he even rolls off an interesting quip because it shows, and I didn't mean to give the imply at all that he should know, rules or whatnot. I just thought it was an interesting scene later on where he has to ask, like you said, where he kind of how he envisioned slavery actually was versus what it actually is and experienced in firsthand, because he had not had that before. I thought was an interesting dynamic you don't see a lot of in films like this. But initial interaction with Calloway, when Calloway first was looking at him confused, like, I've never heard anything like that before. He rolls off, goes, "Oh, it's the New Jersey accent."
Yeah.
And I'm like sitting there going, "No, no, it's not." And you're in the audience going, "Dude, Jason, shush. Jason he doesn't care. He doesn't care." And Calloway is played wonderfully by Andrew Duggan, who would go on to do the It's Alive films later on. He plays the professor in the It's Alive and the sequel to It's Alive B horror films. But here he just plays this vile character so well. You just hate this guy so much. And the way he plays him I thought was great. I mean, and like you mentioned, look at Ed Asner as Plunkett. It's like I'm like sitting here going, my brain is having a hard time watching him be this character that you're just like, I want you bad to happen to you, but you're Ed Asner.
He plays a good heavy.
He
And
does.
I love his introduction, because before we see him, really, we see this kind of procession of the people that he's bringing back,
Mhm.
from being runaway slaves, and mostly like their feet. They're all chained together, and there's like horses and stuff, but they're walking. Some of them are walking barefoot. Some have just like rags that are strapped to their or tied to their feet, and
Mhm.
you just wonder how. And he talks about how, I think when it came to like negotiation for a decent price for Jason, he's like, yeah, I lost, however many people on the road out here, so I got to get
Yeah.
compensated for that. Like, oh my God. Like, just it's again, this movie shows you, it doesn't tell you. It
Mhm.
illustrates the horrors of slavery mostly through the mundane business transaction, everyday kind of way of life, banality of evil way,
Mhm.
rather than. And as much as I love 12 years a slave, it did get very graphic with the violence. Like the whipping scene was like something out of Passion of the Christ. You don't need all that. All you got to
No.
do is show it, this is what certain people could do, and this is what
It
certain people could not do. And isn't that fucking terrifying?
it is terrifying, and yeah, they showed just enough in here because it's played as comedy, but you get these kind of heavy moments. It's just like when we first see Plunkett too, it's interesting because he's negotiating the price and he starts to reach into his vest, and Quincy just pulls out the gun and goes, "Just bring out that hand empty," knowing full well this guy was just about to pull a gun and shoot him and take Jason. He's like, yeah, no, you know. But what I appreciate to them having Quincy get whipped, because it's twofold. One, it plays out the way the story. He got caught. He's, Calloway's people caught him posing as a priest, realizing that he's in with Jason. Jason and him think they're home free. But also it gives Quincy, I think, that next level of understanding he needed to really understand about, yeah, we're not going to do another game like that. We're not going to do another skin game, because he was like, oh no, we still, sure, we won't do it, but he is only doing it half-heartedly. And then him getting whipped, I think, it gives his character that final realization of exactly what this means. And when they do free him, he goes and he just socks the freaking slave master, and it helps, I think, with Jason's argument of going, look, we can't just leave these people behind. We all have to go. And he's like, and then he's like, okay, fine.
Right. And there's all these kind of like multi-level identity things, playing out throughout the movie. One thing, I was getting really tense when Jason is, I think it was when he was sold to Plunkett, who eventually sold him to Calloway, but that kind of standoff in the town square where he and Quincy are trying to escape, and they get confronted by the two people who they had both bought Jason for $400 or something. So there's a dispute. Jason goes on the attack, and he starts like, trying to fight people. And you could tell that he says this, I'm a free man, I'm from New Jersey and all this other stuff, and I don't have to put up with this, but he does, because of where he's at and who he is in that situation. But you just see, like, yeah, he shouldn't have to put up with any of this nonsense.
No.
But I don't think there's any cutaways to anybody else who might be watching this in the town, but you can almost get the feeling of, if there were other blacks in the street, they would be like, no, I would not. Yeah. No, you do. You don't do that. Because they've been conditioned, and they're living in those circumstances. But yeah, there's just like, you feel so bad, because like, yeah, kick the shit out of those guys, and I hope you don't get killed.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting too with that scene, because here we think our two con men have been managing to pull it over on the dumb white yokels for most of this while now. But then they're here, and when Plunkett's there, and the other guy shows up going, yeah, I bought the same slave, whatever, and he escaped. And Quincy's like, yeah, he needs to go to him, because he knows what type of guy Plunkett is.
Yeah.
And Plunkett's like, no, I bought him for 200. The guy's, well, I bought him for 400. And the guy is like, well, you know what, Plunkett, you could have him for 400. And Quincy's like, wait, no, this isn't going the way.
Right. And partially that's because Plunkett knows that he can get, 3 times that much or twice that much by selling to Calloway. So it's like, yeah, he'll cut him double his price and all that stuff. Again, you talk about, it's almost like people selling used cars.
So the way they talk about it is,
right. And you've got, Jason standing there, the combination of, I can't believe these people are trying to sell me.
Yeah.
Along with, I hope I don't get sold to the wrong person.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting layers going on in this film. And I enjoyed it. It was a lot, I'm going to say it was a lot better and a little bit deeper than I thought it was going to be when I watched the trailer for it. I'm like, okay, I'm in. All right, it's going to be kind of a light 70s, early 70s Western. Okay, 70s Westerns are odd. They're just odd beasts in general. But in this one, I'm like, wow, this has actually got meat to it, and by the end of it, I'm like, wow, that was a solid film. Just, all together, story and performances and everything. I mean, for its time when it was made.
Well, that's the other thing. This is a PG rated movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I know times have changed and everything, but it's not just that it was, parental guidance suggested. It's the nutrition of the sophisticated ideas and the drama and the comedy they were playing. I mean, the PG movies don't look like this anymore. This is, like we were talking about before, this is like closer to prestige Oscar bait, kind of stuff, not general audience things. Yeah.
Some interesting trivia. This is Warner Brothers' 1500th release.
Wow.
By this point in 71. Yeah. A couple other things. There was a sequel to this. A 90-minute TV movie called Sidekicks is directed by Burt Kennedy, based on this movie. Unlike the movie, the television version was set after the Civil War. Louis Gossett Jr. plays Jason again, but James Gardner character was now played by Larry Hagman. Right? It was intended to be a pilot, but it didn't take off.
A post-Civil War slave comedy for TV. I mean, if they can have Hogan's Heroes, why not?
Why not? Yeah.
No, I want to find that pilot. I mean, I wonder if it's on YouTube or something. Or again, Warner Brothers dig all that shit up and put on a special, 2-disc edition skin game set or something. Because this is.
And then a couple other interesting tidbits. Louis Gossett Jr. and Ed Asner would once again work together when it comes to Roots. That it was out. And then Gardner and Louis Gossett Jr. were together in a couple episodes of the Rockford Files.
Here's the thing. I'm embarrassed to say this, but I've never seen Roots. I think I remember it was on TV. I think when I was very, very young.
It was a big, it was a big event. Yeah.
I think my parents watched it, but I was, probably 2 years old or something. And also I've never seen the Rockford Files. I don't know much about James Garner aside from the movie Tank with C. Thomas Howell, which my dad loved and watched all the time back when on HBO in like the mid 80s.
Oh, fucking Tank. Yeah, I remember Tank. That was a big Gardner.
But again, watching him in this movie, I brought up the Han Solo and Chewie thing because I feel like he's got that same kind of roguish, but he's a professional kind of pirate and he can get the job done, but he's also a bit of a fool. He can pull one over on like a stormtrooper, but not his partner. He's got those kind of like those Harrison Ford, Han Solo kind of reactions when he's being made fun of by his best friend, that kind of hound dog like that just he's so cool in this movie. And so is Louis Gossett Jr., so is Candy Clark. Like, this is just such a cool movie, and you wouldn't think, oh, it's a 1971 Western. No, it's like this thing is way ahead of its time.
It is in a lot of ways. It definitely is ahead of its time. I was surprised of how good it was, and I was happy to pick it. I was happy that it was that good, because I'm like, I mean, I'm like, I love Louis Gossett Jr. And he's in here as Lou Gossett, but I'll watch him in anything. He's just one of those performers that he's one of those guys where, oh, this movie's got a bit. Okay, I'll watch it. Even if it's Iron Eagle 3, I'll watch it. Okay. I saw
Iron Eagle 3.
I saw 3 in the theater. So, I fully admit it.
The writing in here is there's so many great one-liners. I think one of Jason's lines is, "I'm going back to New Jersey where people are people." They also when Jason and Quincy are talking about Naomi, and Quincy says, "You mean she's a slave?" And Jason says, "Yeah, there are some real ones, Again, just that cluelessness of like, hey, we're just doing jobs, we're having fun, and like, no, you're actually in the middle of a severe cultural revolution. You've been through my pockets more than I have today.
Yeah.
I think Quincy said that to Ginger.
Well, Ginger gets a great moment in here that it's a PG movie, but I swear it was her subconsciously saying "fuck you," and it was when she first confronts him and she takes his stuff or whatnot, she talks about slavery, and Quincy kind of defends his stance, because he's playing the con of a slave owner, and she just stops and she goes, "God loves you," and walks away to where she says it in such a tone like, "Fuck you."
Yeah, that's a Southern thing. If
right,
you ever hear someone say "bless your heart," they don't mean that.
No, they do not. They do not at all. Oh no, I know that one. I know that one quite a bit.
So I think the last line of the movie is, or one of the last lines, because they go off into the sunset, Ginger and Quincy, but Jason had taken most of their money, left them with like $14,
Yeah,
except for the Chicago money, I guess, but they have to
right.
get there. Is she says, "Son of a bitch." And Quincy, James Garner delivers one of the all-time, like, it's right up there with Shatner yelling Khan in Star Trek 2. What he realizes Ginger's taking all their money. He says, "Damn it!"
Yeah, a lot of great moments, a lot of things. I mean, yeah, they're a bit problematic, but overall, I like Skin Game. I'd recommend it. What about you, sir?
Oh, I love Skin Game. I want to
Mhm.
yell it from the rooftops, but I have a feeling if I did, people are like, "Why you like this racist old movie?" I'm like, "Oh, oh."
Again, it's another one of those films where it does have its moments because it is in the 70s, but overall, the overall picture of it, you got to pay attention of what's actually going on, the
Yeah.
interaction between the characters, the dialogue, everything, the situations that are going on. You're right. Overall, there's a lot of interesting things being addressed in here, in a way, that you might not expect for a film like this that's played off as a supposed, con artist comedy of sorts.
I told my wife, this is before I finished it because I watched it a
Sure.
couple of different parts, but I was like, "I cannot wait to watch this movie with you." And I said, "I got a really great movie we should watch together." And she's like, "What is it?" And I said, "It's called Skin Game." And she's like, "Gross." Like, no, no, no. It's not like the usual movies Mark and I watch.
Oh, sure. Oh, I see how. Oh, that's great. She's gonna have this wonderful opinion of me now. It's like, oh, you're talking to that Mark guy again. He makes you watch those movies. Okay, I see how that goes.
Broadens my horizons. That's what I say.
Oh, that doesn't help much. Say, broaden your, that doesn't help much. Just for some perspective for folks, they keep tossing around monies in this. Like, Plunkett says he doesn't get pay any more than $200 for a slave, or people are throwing him back $500 or $1,000. I looked it up. $100 in 1857. How much do you think that is today, Ian? A hundred
$5,000.
$100. You're close, actually. Well, you're in the ballpark. $3,400. $3,400 equal $100. So if you're talking $500 back in 1857, these plantation owners are throwing around a lot of money. And then putting it in perspective, if they've got $10,000 in the bank in Chicago, they've got some bank.
Yeah.
they, that's some serious money that they've got, but they love the con, so much, not so much the Skin Game con, but these con artists, that's in their blood. They can't help themselves. So even though they've got money that they could retire on easy, they split 50-50. They got enough money to retire and live comfortably for the rest of their life. They're still doing the con.
Well, it's also interesting because the Skin Game, and we don't get a whole lot about, the rest of
Mhm.
their con lives, except kind of hints of some of the scams they ran before. But the Skin Game is almost the most honest, righteous version of being a con artist as you can be. It's just like going around like ripping off white slavers, as opposed to like fortune telling scams, or
Right. Yeah.
Quincy and Ginger are going to do some kind of like a gold rush scam,
Mhm.
later on at the end of the movie or after the movie is over, I guess. But yeah, it's kind of unfortunate that they're going to stop doing the skin game, because it's almost like a Robin Hood thing, right? You know,
almost. So there you have it, folks. Skin Game, 1971. Seek it out. If this discussion at all wet your whistle, we haven't spoiled everything about it. It should be seen, especially if you're a fan of Louis Gossett Jr. and or James Gardner or both. You should see it. And for Ed Asner in a different role, who's enjoying playing a bad guy. I always love these actors who usually get the kind of good guy role or the friendly role or whatever. When they actually manage to get a role where they can be a bad guy, they play it so they like drip with you. They just like enjoy it so much, it seems.
But honestly, I don't believe in trigger warnings, but I kind of want to give one for this movie. If you're a big Ed Asner fan, I'm not kidding when I was uncomfortable with the frequency and the ease with which he was throwing that word around. I'm like, because I sometimes wonder about this, not so much today because you don't really see it anymore today, but when you've got those scenes where people, you know, throwing out these racial epithets to or around actors, even though they're playing characters, like, what does that do? You know, do they have like a big understanding? And even if they do, that's still got to be kind of hard to hear, especially like, oh, we got to do take 38, you know? Like,
yeah, it'd be interesting to see, you know, especially back then, you know, they didn't have sensitivity training and you know, on site, you know, folks to talk if you needed to. You know, it reminds me a bit of when they were talking about the Black Klansman, you know, with Wesley with
John David Washington.
And the director,
Spike Lee.
Spike Lee was, I think it was telling Topher Grace, because Topher Grace is playing the head of the KKK, and Spike Lee was telling Topher what to say that wasn't in the script, and he said there were a number of times he goes, Spike's telling me to say this, because he's like, he had trouble saying some of the dialogue in that, obviously, because he's playing, you know, uber racist guy, head of the Klan, and Spike Lee would just come up and whisper to him and tell him what to say, and he's just like, oh my God.
I'm glad that story went the way it was, because I thought you were going to say Spike Lee kept having to tell Topher, look, tone it down. That's not in the script. No. Stick to the dialogue.
I saw in 2 different interviews, apparently, no, Spike wanted him to ramp it up a bit. And he was barely comfortable playing the character as it was. Yeah. But the thing is, from what I've read about Spike, I'm like, I could totally see him say that. Hey, Topher, say this. What?
But he wasn't rolling, just having him say it into his cell phone, so later on he could get some blackmail on it. You're not gonna believe.
You remember when you
you
remember when you said this? Oh my God! Because I think that was Topher Grace who played the head of the clans, I think. I forget. I think it was him. But in any case, that was I liked that movie quite a bit, but I just found that story funny. That it was Topher Grace playing David Duke. It's like, because talking about dialogue. So the dialogue in here is rough to hear people talk about it, but you know, that's their character. But even in that context, it's probably gonna be a bit tough to hear. But I think this is a film that is also worth watching, even though it's from 71, and even with some of the problematic parts overall, it's a really interesting film. It's you know, not what is advertised. Let's put it that way. There's more to it than what's advertised. And
I rented this off Amazon, and again, I'm kind of pissed that there's not a great Blu-ray release, because it was a really good transfer, especially if you look at like IMDb or even like the Amazon preview. They start showing a trailer, and it looks like this trailer from 1971. It's all grainy and crappy looking, but it's a pretty pristine transfer. So you can rent it. I almost recommend buying it sight unseen, because it's wonderful. So thank you, Mark, for recommending this.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad it worked out. Like a number of these picks are sometimes are just blind picks of I'm just going with the theme and luck out, and this is one of those times where we really lucked out, and it was fun. It was definitely an enjoyable watch.
Last thing, speaking of themes, a carryover from last month. I don't know if you caught it, but one of the towns they were in, there was a grain and feed store in the background named Stoker.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that. You mentioned the town names. There was Fair Shake and Dirty Shame was a couple of the town names. I loved the town names. It was a lot of fun. Oh, and one of my other favorite lines, Jason is walking along and Quincy tells him at one point, because the town they're in, this is when they first come into town, he goes, just make sure, be happy. And he says something to the effect of, happy, is that the one where the mouth turns up? And he's like, yeah. But it's the delivery between Gardner and Gossett. The two of these their banter is so natural. It really makes their partnership work well. They rattle it off very well. So there you have it, folks. Hope that make you seek it out. And now, as always, hashtag license to shill to my good friend and co-host here, Mr. Ian Simmons. So please, sir, shill away.
Thank you. I'm Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com or on YouTube. If you look up Kicking the Seat on YouTube. We do weekly movie reviews and interviews and all kinds of crazy series and stuff. This Wednesday at 8 p.m. Central, we're going to be doing a live stream about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And Mark, I hope you can join me, because I have the sinking feeling that I'm going to be defending this movie possibly all by myself to people who may not have cared for it so much. That's always fun. Baffling. I'm baffled.
It's the impression I was getting given by some of the comments. It was kind of like, wait, what? Yeah.
So we'll see. It'll be a spirited discussion either way, because I do have some issues with Guardians 3, but honestly, on the whole, and not to completely play my hand, I thought it was a great way to end this series. And even though it's my big return to comic book movies, I also felt like this could be my last. I know we got the Flash coming out, but in terms of like Marvel stuff, and partially because there's a strike going on right now, if this were the last Marvel Comics movie I ever saw, I'd be okay with that.
Nice. Well, it should be an interesting discussion. I'll definitely try to make it to help you out with it, because it was folks can, if you're at all interested, you can catch my Movie Man's Movie Minute, where I give my 1 minute summary of, if you haven't seen them so far, they're on TikTok as well as YouTube right here. I try to summarize and give my quick thoughts on a wide release film in 1 minute. And they've been fun to do. I've been doing it almost 2 years now. It doesn't seem like it, and people seem to like it. So maybe it's just the way my brain is wired. As far as my stuff goes, well, you're here now, but if you haven't yet, please subscribe to our channel. We're trying to hit 2,500 subscribers by the end of the year, which may seem like a low number for someone who's been doing it for almost 17 years. But for me, it'd be great if we just hit that number or beyond. It would be cool. It'd be cool to hit that. Good to have goals. I figured I'd set a goal this year. And also look for, we've got 3 reviews that dropped. We've got 2 more coming. I've got a bunch of stuff on the way. I've got an interview with a gentleman who made a film called Mickey Hardaway, which was a dramatic indie film that I really enjoyed. And I've got an interview with the filmmaker and director, Marcellus Cox. We've got that interview coming up next week. So I'm going to be talking to him about his film. And it's we've got a lot of other great stuff coming on that you can do by just subscribing. Hit the subscribe button. And even if you want, hit the little bell so you know when I'm posting crap. Or you know when to avoid the channel. But either way, hit the bell and subscribe. That way you know what not to watch on my channel. But in any case, Thank you so much. Please subscribe to our podcast as well. We got a lot of great stuff coming up. Whole bunch of stuff. And next film that we're going to be covering will be the revisit. It's going to be Under the Skin, our first spoiler room revisit, where we will be looking at a film that we looked at a number of years ago. So we'll see if I still feel the same way about it. And hope you tune into that. So until then, folks, we'll just say a good night, everyone.